Gabs, the fame power to engage your world. Enrique Iglesias, he's with Sean Garrett on that one, titled Away, released in 2008, I believe. And that's just how we kick off the Law and Beyond today. We're jumping straight into it, and I'm with Ramo and Amo. Ladies, welcome to The Juice.
Hi, Demi.
The Juice remixed. How are you doing today?
We're doing great. We're really excited about the show today.
Yeah, I'm excited as well. I was a little bit intimidated because I know you guys are like legal minds, and you know, usually you're with TK and you have this thing going on. I was like, how is this going to work? But anyway, I'm excited because I'm going to learn a lot. All right. Today we're talking about property law and COVID-19, and we're not alone in the studio. We've got a special guest here with us today, talking property law and COVID-19 with a renowned attorney, Mompoloki Lerumo Mogobe. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, ladies. I feel really honored to be surrounded by three ladies. It doesn't happen every day, believe me.
It doesn't happen every day, but we're happy to have you here with us this evening. I'm looking forward to, soaking up all the knowledge that we're going to be sharing on the show today. Property law and COVID-19.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. And let's just jump straight into it.
Well, actually, before we jump straight into it, I think the listeners might be curious a little bit about our speaker or our special guest this evening, and why particularly we chose to have Mr. Mogobe in the studio. So for those of our listeners that do not know, Mr. Lerumo Mogobe is a distinguished legal practitioner of the High Court, but that is not all he does. He defines himself as a serial entrepreneur. And we've had a great look at his profile. You'll find that he has
all 10 pages of it.
All 10 pages.
All 10 pages of it.
And he has his hands in many pies, from speaking to motivational speaking, mentoring. If you look around, property, sanitation as well? Stocks and equity. How did you discover your love for entrepreneurship?
Well, I think it grew into me as once I developed a taste for personal development. I enjoyed reading, exposing myself to new experiences. And once I also discovered the limited nature of the legal practice in terms of attaining some of the goals that I had, I then diversified my interest into other areas of economic activity.
And for those of our listeners that don't know, Mr. Mogobe has a very interesting Facebook page called Mogobe Inc. on Facebook, where you'll also find really cool snippets called the Nuggets of Wisdom.
Yeah.
Well, just to correct you, I have several presences there. One is Mogobe Inc., the other is Momp Mogobe, the blog. The other one is Momp Mogobe, the page. And then, of course, Mogobe Inc., the company. And then I do have a presence also in other platforms, LinkedIn. And then most notably on YouTube through the vehicle of Mogobe Nuggets of Wisdom podcast.
Thank you so much.
I'm very easy to find.
We were saying off air, actually, you're talking about how you are a content creator.
Yes.
Not the slave queen type.
Not the slave queen type, serving up wisdom, like you're saying.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, ladies. We try. We do our best.
Yeah, I think maybe we can just go straight into the conversation that we're having today. We would like you to give us a brief outline of the types of land tenure systems in Botswana.
Well, I think one cannot describe them without going to the historical. Pre-independence, we had the pre-independence system, pre-colonial, where the horses or the chiefs were in control. And then after, pre-colonial, being declared a protectorate, it was just the chiefs, nothing else. They were in charge of the land. They actually had personal ownership of the land, but on behalf of the tribe. That's how the system worked. And then after We were colonized after we declared a protectorate, specifically around 1895, the colonial era. We had 3 land tenure systems, in terms of which we had the crown lands, which were, it was a bit like a mini apartheid, if you know what I mean, in that there was the native reserves, and then which now later became tribal land, and then freehold and crown lands. Those were the 3 categories. And then, of course, after 1966, after the coming into operation of the Tribal Land Act, we have now the post-independence system, which you and I will discuss. But it more or less followed the old colonial system, in the sense that we now had leasehold, and then we had freehold, and then we also had the state land. So we had those categories. Now, that's more or less, broadly speaking, that's how it is.
I think I'd like to know, from a personal question also, what kind of land do you think the average Botswana should invest in, and how do you start investing in property, etc., etc.?
Well, what kind of land should an average Botswana invest in? Now, you find that traditionally there have been 3 categories of lands that we've had. You would have your land, which is at the village, which is where the kotla is. You would have your homestead there. Then you would have a piece of land where you have tsimo, komasimo, and then you would have the moraka. You'd have those 3 separate bits and pieces, even for an average Botswana. So I think, talking about nowadays, it's ideal for a Botswana to have land and to develop land, and then it will be a matter of individual tastes and preferences. But in the very minimum, you should have a roof over your head, and then you should also consider owning the land from which you conduct your business or your business operation. If you have a farmer, I think you should not part with your farm. You should own it. If you are into something else, it's ideal. I am pro-ownership as opposed to
renting.
In studio, talking all things property and COVID-19. We were just talking now about what type of property that Botswana should be looking to invest in. You know, and as a person who doesn't really understand legal things, I was actually shocked. We were talking about freehold land and all that stuff earlier on, and you know, I heard something about, okay, the land is sort of yours for 99 years, and then it's kind of not yours. What does that mean?
Well, it depends which category of land you are referring to. Tribal land, typically they'll give you a leasehold. Either if it's commercial, they might give you a 50-year lease. If it's residential, it might give you a 99-year lease. The whole notion is based on the concept that you don't really own the land. The idea is that you're a steward of sorts. You're holding it on behalf of the tribe. The land belongs to the people, and you cannot really own it as an individual, and so on. But in reality, once you have that lease, you are able to register it at the Registrar of Deeds and convert what would normally be considered tribal rights into you are formalizing your rights to the where once you register that lease, and their tribal rights become common law rights, and then you are able to actually approach banks and the like to use that as a form of security. So really the period for which you are granted those leasehold rights depends entirely on the issuing authority. State land, you'd find that the government giving you, for instance, a deed of fixed period state grant, where typically in places like Gaborone, you'll be given for 50 years to use that property for whatever purposes. Mostly, I would say I'm familiar with the commercial space. So I don't know if that answers your question, madam.
Definitely does.
Yeah. Maybe just to add on, I think it's also the observation that when you buy a property, there's an obligation that you should build on it or have some sort of development on it. So that in essence, you're not buying the land, you're buying the development on the land.
Yeah. In
Like
relation
Mr.
to
Mogobe
tribal
was saying
land.
about being a steward to the land.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh,
That is correct.
and I think also with regard to the conveyance of property, I think we find that a lot of Botswana and basically a lot of first-time homeowners get caught up in the concept of transfer duty. What is that in a simplified sort of way?
Well, transfer duty is a form of tax in the sense that there's a percentage, normally 5% presently, but I know that there's an effort to change the threshold. If I'm not mistaken, with citizens up to 200,000, you're not you're not charged, but beyond 200,000, it's 5%. But I believe there's been an amendment to take it to 1 million.
Yeah.
And there are several other changes. But transfer duty, really think of it as a tax because it's payable to the government.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting that at the beginning of this conversation, you were talking about how traditionally Botswana have 3 pieces of land. But I think as we move into this day and age, it seems like a lot of Botswana are struggling in terms of access to land. And a lot of people talk about the long turnaround times in relation to being allocated land, for example, by a land board, or even the amount of the land in terms of its prices. What is the cause of this sudden shift? Well, maybe not sudden.
I wouldn't say it's sudden.
Yeah.
I mean, all across the country, there's an outcry. There's a complaint that the turnaround time for land boards is taking too long. I have personally interacted with the Ngamiland, the Tawana land board in Ngamiland, and also other land boards in the peri-urban areas, or the surrounding areas of Gaborone. And generally, applications take forever. It's not unheard of to find, applications taking up to several decades. I remember some years ago there was a rumor. I think it was a post on social media where it was announced. I don't know whether it was fake news or not. That the land board was awarding land, and there was a stampede literally in Tlokweni,
Heard about that.
which goes to show you that there's hunger for land. And if you look at the vastness of our land in Botswana, given the size of our population, most accounts say we're about 2.3 million. But we have a very vast territory. I don't know whether we're about 2/3 of South Africa or something like that. It's very big. And you will you get the impression that our problem is land management and setting up a land allocation system. And the recent LAPCAS system was an effort to address that. And so it is an issue that has become political. And to some extent, I'm grateful that the new regime has made a conscious effort to change the dynamic, in the sense that now it's easier to change your land use from, say, residential to commercial, and so on and so forth. Like, it's one of the first things that the new president did. And it's much easier for people.
Less limitations.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even the values of the land has been unleashed and released as a result of this change. So we are hoping that the system will become more user friendly. And of course, the other problem, you're asking why that is so, has been the issue of corruption. And it's been all over the papers in the recent past that land boards, people in land boards had to be fired en masse because of corruption, because of cabals, because of all kinds of corrupt systems having been set up. So I think with a more conscious and asserted effort by government to clean up the system, I think it will free up a lot of land, and people will be hopefully those who are in the long queue will be attended to.
Yeah.
But it's a vast array of problems which I'd like to believe that the new government is attending to.
Would you think that maybe youth, because of the hunger you speak about, would you think it would be a good idea for us to crowdfund and maybe buy large portions of land? Because I us maybe not having as much money or not having jobs, it becomes really hard to attain land. So what advice would you have for youth to try and attain just a little bit of land and for their children?
That is a very good question, a very powerful question. I have been getting together with a group of potential investors, Batswana investors. There's been a recognition that there's been the manner in which resources are allocated and the manner in which the economy has been run is skewed in favor of certain groups, some of them from outside. And there is an effort by certain Batswana, and if you need to access some of this information on social media, I'll make it available to you. The whole idea is to engage in a form of crowdfunding where you set up a special purpose vehicle through which you can set up through a regulated system, something regulated by NBFIRA, for instance. You set up a unit trust.
Okay.
And through that unit trust, people can be able to purchase shares in this special purpose vehicle. And that special purpose vehicle will then invest in land. Property is a big problem. If you take the example of the CBD, for instance, and I've been discussing these with the likes of Victor Senye, with the likes of Mr. Chabad, Mr. Chabad, I'm sure you've seen him on social media, and his basic argument, is to say the time has arrived, especially after COVID. We have come to the
land.
Yeah, we've come to the realization that we need to get together as Botswana. That spirit of Ipeleche. Remember how we built our university?
Yeah.
That whole idea of putting our resources together and then being able to participate.
Yeah.
And this system of unit trusts is one way by which we can purchase land, we can purchase, and there's a deal in the works, if I can say so myself, relating to the acquisition of Finance House. Still in the works, and it's still being discussed, where Batswana will be approached and invited to purchase an asset such as Finance House, something in the CBD, in the government, the old CBD, which is the government enclave. So there is that awareness, and I see that for the first time in a long time, I'm seeing that there's a concerted, conscious effort by Batswana to empower themselves. I think since we're talking about COVID has actually awakened people.
Yes.
It has actually, it was both a curse and a blessing at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. I wanted to also ask another question. In your experience, in the different types of land that you might own, how badly or how has COVID affected the property market, and would it be the best time to buy property? Because I heard two questions that are
one.
loaded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I have
Loaded
to take
ones.
one at a time.
Yeah.
How has COVID affected what?
The property market.
Yeah, I have spoken to a couple of valuers since we came out of Sirubi, came out of lockdown, and the view that they hold is that there's not been a significant impact in terms of lowering property values or anything like that. But us at Mogobe Incorporated, as people who deal with property, have been massively affected. I was getting numbers from my accountant confirming that we have about a 40% default rate for the month of July. That is devastating when you have to pay a bank as well, coupled with other challenges relating to the loss of one of our anchor tenants. So in that sense, what has happened is that people have tended, government and other people have tended to take what I would call precipitative action because of COVID. Sometimes COVID is used as an excuse. Sometimes COVID is used as a reason for taking action, such as terminating leases, such as, for instance, not honoring your lease obligations. So COVID has certainly affected people. And from another point of view, certain businesses where you're literally closed down for 2 months, some people cannot afford. The people operating in at smaller levels. So COVID has had a devastating effect on people, but it has also afforded some an opportunity first of all to introspect, an opportunity to reconfigure
and diversify.
Yeah, who would have
streams of
known that
income.
Botswana can manufacture so many masks locally?
Yes.
Yes, it's very
And
exciting.
sanitation or the sanitizer
And the
business
chicken,
is
Yeah.
the chicken
thriving.
drive.
The chicken
Yeah.
drive,
The chicken
the
drive.
vegetables,
And home
now-
delivery of
home delivery of
vegetables.
vegetables. We didn't know. I mean,
Yeah.
we used to think that Choppies and Paylors are the only places you could get vegetables.
Yeah.
Yes.
So there's been that realization. I've had some people in my employ actually quit employment to say, let's go try our luck. Let's go start something. So that's why I say COVID has been both a blessing
And a
and a
curse.
curse. Yeah.
I think I also wanted to ask in relation to the dynamics that affect the property market, particularly with purchasing. I think it seems like there's an ebb and flow where sometimes it's really a bad time to sell or a really great time to purchase. Can you tell us a little bit of those dynamics?
Well, you have to go deeper with property. Property is basically cyclical. It goes in cycles. It's a good time for you to consider buying, and sometimes a crisis or a depression or a recession can afford those who have been saving an opportunity to get into the property market and to try property.
Yeah.
So there seems to be, in my experience, cycles ranging from between 7 to 10 years where there's a boom and bust type of situation. So a good investor will position himself in such a way that they will anticipate some of these things.
Eyes on those.
So
Yeah.
what we experience with COVID is what is described as a black swan event, which is as rare as a black swan is, because all the swans are white, right? So it's something that has really taken everybody by storm. Literally, as recently as February this year, nobody knew what COVID was. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? It was only things we saw on television here and there. So everybody was taken unaware, even to some extent our government. So my guess is that it will take 6 months to 12 months for this situation to be managed depending on whether there are any further outbreaks, there are any cases. And my prayer is that the COVID task team is not tempted to recommend another lockdown.
I think also as we're talking to people who may be potential like first home purchasers. How do you develop that eye for the trends? Do you have any tips as someone with a lot
It's
of property?
difficult to say, and sometimes you don't really look into a crystal ball or anything
Yeah.
like that. I think it
True.
depends. What I would advise and encourage the listener to do is to immerse themselves in property in terms of reading more and in terms of understanding things more. I mean, if there's one category in the internet that is full of information, is real estate or property. My suggestion would be for people to read books. I would recommend books such as the Cash Flow Quadrant. I would recommend other books on property. Even the classic, Rich Dad Poor Dad by Kiyosaki as a starting point where you can position yourself. I personally think that property you can acquire at any time if you plan, in terms of having a saving strategy, in terms of developing relationships with banks for you to be able to borrow, in terms of connecting with the likes of Cedar. You need to position yourself. You need to really educate yourself, and it's not for the faint-hearted, because you can be left with your shirt only on your back if you're not careful.
The creditors.
Yeah.
Yeah. I actually wanted to ask another question. With maybe an advice to buy property now, and there being a fear of job losses and the no job security because of COVID-19, and it's very clear that the banks will come for their property if you default. In your experience, maybe not talking about property, what can't you go wrong with in terms of business? Because clearly with the property thing, and people not having jobs. The
a
rent
bit
thing is
icy.
not as easy. What in your experience in business can one person not go wrong with?
I think that question suggests I don't like the underpinning of that question because it implies that there is a pill, a one pill answer. It is, and the idea that you are totally immunized from challenges or
Risk.
and from risk. So I don't think there's a business that I can sit here and say nothing can go wrong. But I think for as long as you educate yourself and you position yourself and develop a network and you engage in a process of continuous learning, a process of really immersing yourself in your field, because I would recommend a restaurant, and I'll call two restaurant owners. One will say that this is a disastrous business. Someone with the same set of problems will say this is a brilliant business. Similarly, I would recommend, since we keep talking about 4IR, I'd recommend some form of content creation, or some business involved in the internet space. You meet two people who say two opposite things about same experience. So it's really a function of how you position yourselves and how tenacious you are.
Yeah,
It's about
resilience.
tenaciousness, tenacity. You have to be audacious and be willing to withstand the difficulties, the inevitable difficulties of getting into business.
Yeah.
I mean, unavoidably, you know that you're going to be having a few uppercuts and a few right hooks, and you're going to land on the ground a few times.
Yeah.
So the problem is that don't stay on the ground. Don't stay on the ground. Get up each and every time. So I'm sorry, Ma, I won't be able to answer your question.
But I think we need to invite you back
appreciate it.
for a motivational session because I think we all felt a little quite.
Yeah, no, I think the general consensus is that everyone is feeling a little bit unsure and uncertain. So I think it would be really nice to have some motivation.
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind coming again.
I think when we also talk about land and acquiring it, particularly through our tribal land boards, many people face the problem of getting property that is actually already under the title of somebody else, such that you have that layover of titles over titles, and that creates.
You're talking
a bit
about
of,
fraud, isn't it?
yeah, basically. So
So
I think maybe a question for our listeners would be in relation to what questions you should ask as somebody who's trying to purchase land in the realm of due diligence. How do you do your homework?
I thought you'd never ask. I've actually done a video on this exact question. If you go to the Nuggets of Wisdom, Mogobe Nuggets of Wisdom, because there's a whole video on how to conduct due diligence in a property deal.
Oh, great.
Essentially, what you need to do is go through certain steps. After you've viewed the property physically and ascertained how it is, assuming that it's a developed property, you want to conduct thorough deed search. Preferably, you can go with assistance of an attorney, given the sort of problems you discovered, who can then go and check and verify for you the title. In places like America and developed economy, there's title searchers, professional title searchers, whose jobs it is to check title and to verify
Interesting.
ownership. But in Botswana, you have to settle for going to deeds yourself and verifying whether the land is owned by the seller or not. But where in the alternative where the land is not registered in the deeds office, you want to go to the land board. The fraudsters are so good that they can reproduce lease agreements, these blue ones that look so authentic. As a lawyer, I've come across beautiful ones that look original. Sometimes with the collusion of people from the land board, sometimes without. So what I would advise people wanting to acquire land is to go to the land board and go get a letter from one of the most senior persons at the land board, hopefully the land board secretary, him or herself, to confirm. Just a short letter, we verify and confirm this title deed, especially where the land is not registered. And It's even worse with regard to certificates. I've found over the years that certificates are the easiest to maneuver, to manipulate. So you want to really go to, because certificates sometimes come from the sub-land board as opposed to the main land board. So my advice is make sure you go to the originator of that lease and obtain an authentication letter. And request a letter to verify. Because they might say, yeah, it's okay, maybe it's that person is part of the syndicate. But you may want to say, no, I want just a letter before I commit my hand and money on this.
Yeah.
But the best thing, other thing to do to avoid being defrauded is to part with money. Don't part with money before there is a detailed sale agreement between the two of you, which protects you, and before you got your lawyer to take possession of the title deed or the original documents to protect your interests. Get legal advice.
Yeah,
Definitely.
Thank you for giving us business, Mr. Mogobe.
But go to Mogobe Nuggets of Wisdom for more.
Yes, for
more
Free
info.
advice. Yes.
For more info, alrighty, we're back and we're talking property and COVID-19. 14962 is the number to text, or you can call in on 395-6962. We actually have a caller on the line. Gabs FM, hello. All right. We seem to have lost our caller, or there's something wrong with that line, but you can be part of the conversation. All you have to do is text in on 14962 or call in on 395-6962.
Yes, I think to continue our conversation, we just wanted to ask you what schemes or means are available to assist Botswana in purchasing land. We spoke about crowdfunding earlier on.
Yeah.
What other ways are available
I think you can approach SEDA if you have a viable proposition for development. I know that there's one or two institutions of higher learning which approach SEDA and put up structures. We certainly have approached SEDA for some of our developments. So for Botswana, I think SEDA, since construction, for instance, is prioritized in terms of even the new guidelines, would be somewhere to go. Otherwise, you've mentioned crowdfunding. I've mentioned the unit trusts arrangements that are being developed, through the NBFIRA framework, and then other ways is to get together as groups. I, for instance, belong to a group called Tsela, where we literally got together and we put aside a kind of quote-unquote motselo, where we have debit orders in our accounts and have money automatically going to a certain fund. And if there's a property opportunity, there were 10 of us, one of us passed away, so there are 9 now. And we purchase different property assets in that way. So there are many, many ways. There's a program that I listened to called Bigger Pockets Podcast. It's an international podcast based in America. But you can learn a lot by listening to such podcasts in terms of techniques and where the world is heading, in terms of maybe forming schemes. I think if you go there and maybe type in the right search word, you can find a lot of information in terms of, even videos and other, audio recordings where you can learn far more than I'm able to share in the limited amount of time we have.
I think we'd also want to touch on what business opportunities you see, particularly in the purchase of land, that you'd recommend Botswana look into. You see a lot of people buying dilapidated buildings, breathing life into them, and then renting them out. And you also see people partitioning and renting their agricultural land. What are some?
Yeah, there's so many possibilities. I mean, they are only limited by your imagination. I think us at Mogobe Incorporated, for instance, we're guided by the highest and best use notion. With real estate, you have to at all times ask yourself, am I having the highest and best use of this property? In America, for instance, they have the concept of air rights, where in terms of developing, even the higher you go, the more rights you have in terms of developing there. So as I said, you're only limited by your imagination. We ourselves restrict ourselves to 3 areas. One is multi-residential. Why multi-residential? That there will always be a need. Everybody needs a roof over their head. When you finish at university, you need a single room to stay over. And then in 2 or 3 years, maybe you find your boyfriend and you settle down. There's a child, 2 rooms. So those are areas where young families certainly are looking at any given time. So multi-residentials and then industrial. We found with our investment strategy over the years that industrials also tend to attract higher chances of tenancy because people have to manufacture, people have to think, especially now, people have to think in terms of storage, people have to think in terms of those sort of things. And then, of course, there's commercial. Commercial right now, because of COVID, there's a big question mark as to whether people are now asking themselves, why am I paying 20,000, 30,000 for this space when I could be working from home? So things are in a state of flux. But I happen, as an eternal optimist that I am, I happen to believe that in a matter of months, things will stabilize and then the demand will slowly get back to where it is, get back. So there's a vast array of uses that you can look. The one that you suggested is called flipping, isn't it?
Yes.
Where you buy a piece of land, you develop it, you touch it up, and then you sell it. So that's another area, especially if you're looking at cashing in and then maybe buying another property or getting into a business. So you're only limited by your imagination. I think people have to just think outside the box. You mentioned farms as well, farmland. Now with the liberalization that the new regime or the current regime is getting into, you can have your farm converted into industrial and then put up warehouses or rent it out for other people to use.
I think we also saw something about how government is also encouraging multi-purpose use of the land and also agricultural land being used for tourism as well.
Absolutely.
Like that
Absolutely.
As well. So it's really great how we're
especially
getting
now
creative.
Since tourism has had has been hit hard. So people may consider to use the tourism sites for alternative uses, at least temporarily.
Yeah.
What's your take on Airbnbs? I've heard also that they've taken a very big blow since COVID-19.
Yeah. I mean, they've suffered a blow in the same way as everybody else has, but especially some of these businesses, A and B, and of course the taxi one. What is it called?
Uber.
They've taken a knock because everybody during the COVID
it's not
days,
moving.
it's not moving and so on. But it is a very good investment when things are normal. But under the new normal, it seems to me that somebody may want to consider converting their Airbnb to a lodge or to some other thing until things stabilize. So they've been hit hard. Yeah. But I think things will normalize. Are you guys not optimists? Don't you believe?
Definitely.
Don't you guys believe that with prayer, with the right level of positive mental attitude, and so on, we can just bring things back collectively to the way they used to be.
Definitely.
And we could adapt and make them better.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think we'd also love to pick your brain briefly, because I'm sure we're running out of time, but to briefly pick your brain about the concept of timeshare properties. I think we saw it being tried by Bridgetown, where people buy time frames at a particular year of different rooms.
I don't know if Bridgetown is a good example because it was a disaster, isn't it?
It sounded like...
Yeah, it was a disaster. Yeah. They had to really close it down. But timeshare has worked for some companies. But what I found with timeshare is that in the initial stages, you are offered a particular place which you can rent out or go and occupy, maybe for argument's sake, for 6 weeks. Your 6 weeks now, as people grow into the system, it dwindles to 4 weeks and then it goes down. So I found unless the company increases the asset as it brings in more customers, sooner or later, you find
you're crammed.
You try to book, you find that for what the 30th, and I have an example, I won't mention names because I don't want to be sued. You find that the timeshare that you paid 35,000 for originally, that used to afford you quite a sizable is now It doesn't matter if you'll be told stories. You'll be told that, oh, this is the peak period. This is the time when the holidays for schools, and you cannot get a booking comparable to what you used to get. So I've had negative experience. And then there's high pressure tactics that is used to get you to buy. So there are some things where in certain parts of America, there's even laws against certain pressure tactics that are employed when somebody wants to buy. Because you are told that, no, let's go, you've won an opportunity to be given a drink at a certain hotel. And you go there, you find that you have been pressured into buying timeshare. You get a call, Mr. Mogobe, go and take your wife along. Please bring your wife. Come and have some biscuits. You go there, you're pressured into, and you sit there for 2 hours. What was supposed to be just, you're now pressured into signing some contract or to increase the old timeshare. So there are some tactics that they use that I find questionable. And as an industry, they need to clean themselves up. And I'm not sure whether they police themselves the same way as other industries do. If they don't, I think that it's time to police themselves and find a way of regularizing the industry. So I have a lot to say on timeshare, but for now, for fear of being sued and being harassed, let me just stop there.
I think I have one last question. I was just wondering, in your prediction, do you think Gaborone is growing outside? Like, is it a fair investment to buy a multi-res or build one in Mudipane, in Mopane, in Ramotsa, or is it safer to try and invest as close to the city as possible?
When we are newly independent, our parents were given an opportunity to buy land in Gaborone. And what was the common response when plots were costing 1,000 rands? And some houses, literally in the center of town, were costing 1,000 rands in the 70s.
Wow.
What was their common response? Why should I buy land in Gaborone? I'm going to the village. I'm going to the village. Now Gaborone has exploded.
And
the dynamic has changed. It's prime. And some of us, when we started developing Gabani, we used to have people say, it's too far. Who's going to go there? So I think sooner or later, if you look at the way dynamic cities develop, if you go to places like Joburg and you go to Pretoria, you see that you see that sooner or later there's a conurbation and there's growth. So depending on your comfort level, if there's an opportunity anywhere in the surrounding areas to buy land, if it's not overpriced, if you're not being ripped off, go for it. That's my advice.
How will I know I'm not being ripped off?
Valuations, instinct. You women have a huge advantage of us men. You have the what? Female?
Sixth sense.
Instinct.
Intuition.
I wanted you to say it for yourself. So you apply those things. You don't override them. You'll sense it when you know this is
not a good deal.
Yeah, when you know that this person I'm talking to sounds like a snake oil salesman. You can tell. You don't want to be dealing with those snake oil salesmen. No, you don't.
What about the Palapes and the Francis Towns and the Maungs?
We've identified 3 areas for our company, and I can only speak for myself, that are growing. Gaborone and the surrounding areas as it expands. In the Gamiland, it's Maung area as it expands. And then there's signs that Kasane is coming alive, but most importantly, Palapa.
So
to me, those areas are good, but you still have to do your due diligence, still have to do your homework thoroughly.
We'd love to have you in the studio for us longer than this, but we have to ask you our final question, which would be, what would be the top 10 quick tips that you'd give to Botswana looking to purchase land, just off the cuff?
I've already covered that.
Yeah, you have.
But the main thing is to exercise due diligence and to go for it. So go for it. In other words, find those opportunities. I'll tell you, for instance, that some pieces of land in Block 10 were costing 80,000 about 10 years ago. Now they're 800,000, 600,000. So it looks to me that land is a safe bet for investment. You can even engage in what is known as quote-unquote land banking, where you buy a piece of land. If you're unable to develop it, of course, make sure that the land board doesn't repossess it after 2 years, but you can hold on to it for some time. You do a minimal development and hold it. So that's my attitude. But somebody else might think, no, go into stocks, go into other things. But I believe land and property.
Bring back the land.
Yeah.
Bring back the land.
It's important. That's why we had a war of independence in other parts of Africa. It was over land.
Yeah,
Land is
that's
a very
true.
important resource.
Yeah.
Alrighty, I think that's it for the law and beyond today. It's a conversation that could go on and on and on.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping that, if you don't have it on the juice, I could possibly steal Mogobe, bring him on the Weekend Breakfast Club.
He's ours. Don't you dare.
Bring him on the Weekend Breakfast Club. Make sure my people are also taken care of. But ladies, thank you so much
Thank you
for your
having
time
us.
this evening. Thank you so much, Mogobe, for sharing your time and your knowledge.
It's a privilege and honor.
With our listeners, and there's a lot that I've taken away from this conversation myself, which is why it's a conversation but you are on social media, you're a content creator, there's a whole lot of this where you're concerned. How can we access all the stuff that you're doing?
Do you have fingers? Just press a few buttons.
Yes.
Mogobe, boom. Mogobe Nuggets of Wisdom, boom. On different
Hashtag.
platforms. Yeah. So I'm very easy to find. I've given her my details, my contacts. So let's stay in touch.
Yes.
Awesome stuff.